Morning, everyone. Aloha and welcome to the State of Hawaii Department of Transportation's 2022 Protect Our Water Conference. My name is Logan Hicks, and I will be your moderator for this session, titled A Primer on BMPs that Minimize Sediment Discharges. This session will also be streamed concurrently for our virtual viewers on the platform. And at the end of the presentation, the speakers will have a few minutes to answer some questions. Any virtual attendees, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A section on the platform during the presentation to ask any questions you have, and we will answer them at the end if given time. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the session, Dr. Jerry Fifield. He started Hydrodynamics Incorporated in 1982 in Parker, Colorado, has been actively involved in the drainage analyses, sediment and erosion control, and water rights and non-point pollution control. Through his company, he develops sediment and erosion control plans, completes drainage evaluations, provides inspection services, and teaches about controlling sediment and erosion on construction sites. Jerry has authored numerous professional papers, researched sediment and erosion control products, and written sediment and erosion control manuals and field manuals. He is also founder of SciSec, which we all know about, a 501c6 nonprofit organization that educates and certifies inspectors in sediment and erosion control. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Dr. Jerry Fifield.
Thank you, Logan, and welcome everybody. I hope when I get done with my little presentation today that you'll have a little better feel for what works and, more importantly, what doesn't work. And unfortunately, you're going to see more of the latter than you will of the former. And it's just the nature of this game. And so with that in mind, I'd just like to start. When I was asked to do a little bit of a primer on here, I started looking at all of us that are involved in here. Designers, reviewers, contractors, inspectors, all of us got to work together. And one of the things that happens is that a lot of people do not know the difference of those three in front of you there. You know, what is sediment? What is all the other things that are associated with? Well, when we talk about sediment, there's probably three good examples in there. And you notice I've included one that's probably more prevalent in Colorado than you are here in Hawaii, down at the bottom with wind erosion. But it's all part of sediment discharges that we got to be concerned with. Erosion. How would you like to be in that middle slide in that car? It would be okay if it's not at nighttime, but erosion is devastating to us. And also, erosion occurs with wind. Excuse me. The techniques is what we're going to be interested in here. And you're going to see right up that particular example that we have with in front of you, the three techniques that are used for controlling sediment discharges. When we're talking about getting rid of sediment discharges, we're talking about how do you get rid of the sediment out of the runoff waters? Tough, tough job. Matter of fact, it's one of the hardest jobs that you have. What are some of those BMPs that minimize sediment discharges? Well, we need methods that are going to reduce flow velocities, filter, or maybe as an alternative. The middle one we're not going to talk about right now, but they're good, but they're not as effective on a construction site as reducing flow velocities. And that's what our emphasis is going to be about here. So with that in mind, we are always have a bunch of them in here. This is just a review for you. Fiber rolls, you probably know them as wattles. And as I look at this particular picture in here, I have yet to see a construction site that streets are that clean. I know what happened. The contractor had a good time flushing everything down the inlet, right? And unfortunately, we see that happen all the time. But the barriers that you see in there, if they're lightweight, they're going to float. And that's the thing that I want to emphasize more to you, is the fact that just because you got a barrier, put it in an inlet. And if I were doing inspections on this particular illustration, I would reject all of that because of the fact that's not effective. And you'll see what we talk about in here. This one looks pretty good. Matter of fact, it's one of the better ones I've seen. Until we take a good hard look at it, it's not very effective at all. And you'll see that as we come in there, because all of the barriers that you have there are the wattles. They float, they can float. And if they float, they're a joke. It's as simple as that. And that's something you better take a good hard look at as we go through, because many of these barriers have water not going over the top. See where the water's going in that bottom photograph? Underneath. That's what happens all the time, unfortunately. Some examples of incorrect usage. Designers, this is your responsibility. Reviewers, this is your responsibilities. Contractors put in what they see. But in that particular case, around the edges, you didn't extend it out. So it's not a proper usage. Then if you take a look at, reject that one, but we come up to this one. That looks like it works pretty good. Matter of fact, we have a situation there that says, this is what we want to find in front of our inlets. That's fine and dandy. But take a look at the big picture, designers. Take a look at the big picture, contractors. And take a look in the background there. See what's underneath that safety fence? Erosion. If you have erosion occurring, that says that those wattles did nothing at all. Nothing. Spent a lot of money for something that is not working. And if you look at it, you can see water came underneath that wattle. Well, take a look at that right on top of that. Let me go back that one real quick. If you look at the two manholes, you should not see the sediment that you see on that concrete pad, because that says essentially all the water flowed underneath the wattle. Well, in every one of these cases, the wattles have not been installed correctly. Yet we see it all over the United States continually. I see it where they forget to do one of the very essential things. If you're going to use a wattle, you got to stake them in place. You cannot just throw them on top of the ground. And that's what I see all the time. And you better hope the Environmental Protection Agency doesn't come out. By the way, do we have anybody here from the Environmental Protection Agency? That always happens, by the way. So as we go through on here, think about this, but probably one of the biggest jokes is this one. If you put any of these wattles on a hillside, what a joke. They don't work. They don't do anything. They're not erosion control. These are the limitations that have got to be put onto every set of plans. So as we go through on these things, you have to start asking yourself if they're called erosion control, and I've heard them be called erosion control. Think about on a hillside. And look what happens when we put in, say, a wattle that is 20-inch in diameter, which none of you probably would buy. You can capture water behind it. And that's what is the intent of it. Or look what happens when you go down to a 12-inch wattle. All of a sudden, you have less and less water being captured. And then, of course, as a contractor, you want to buy the least expensive wattle there is. So you buy a 6-inch wattle. And look how much benefit you have there. And keep in mind, between the wattles, those are zones for erosion. As big as life. Matter of fact, if these are going to be erosion control products, this should never, ever happen. Those are 8-inch wattles up there. I do not know why we have people that want to design these saying that all you got to do is put a wattle in there. They do not work by themselves for erosion control. With other products, yes, but by themselves, no. You should never see this. So we go through and you see something like that. And if I were out there doing inspections, I would reject both of those. I would say, go back to the drawing board, because that is not effective sediment discharge. That's no effectiveness at all. So we go through and look at these things and then say, well, okay, I'll put a silt fence up. Why in the world would somebody put a silt fence up with rebar is beyond me. And why would you accept it is beyond me. When there's proper ways of doing it. Proper way is very similar to what you see in front of you there. See, just take a look at the two. You can see the difference in there. Matter of fact, this is what's going to happen to a lot of the silt fences there. Yet it was not necessarily going to happen to the one down below it, on the bottom one there. Because of the fact, you take a look, proper design of a silt fence should be 6 to 8 feet apart for the posts, not 15 feet apart. And that's what I see. Contractors, you have an obligation to put it in correctly. And 15 feet apart is not correctly. So we go through and you got to reject that, the bottom one. But the most important one, if you ever, contractor, see somebody say, put silt fence in a drainage channel, throw that back to the designer and says, no, do not put any of these into a drainage channel. For one very big reason, they only work when it doesn't rain. If it rains, you get runoff, you're going to end up getting something like that. Same shot, 2 weeks difference. That's what you got to avoid. And so this planning is not just for the contractor doing alone. It's the designers, reviewer, contractors, inspectors, all getting in there working together to make this work. So another one that a lot of people don't want to do, and it happens throughout the nation, put in set ponds. It don't have to be big ones. For example, like this, that's a big one, because that takes the areas you don't have in Hawaii. I understand that. So go with a small one. It'll work. You'll capture a lot of material and you will capture more sediment in that second photograph than you would with anything in front of it, of an inlet. Far, far more. But they have different shapes, different sizes. You can have something that's kind of unique, or you can even go with what we call a sediment bag. They all work. There are tools available. Vendors out there will talk to you about them. Use something that's effective. Because if you don't use effectiveness as part of your equation and everything, you're going to end up getting yourself in some deep troubles financially. So, designers, I know we got some designers in this room. Think outside the box. For example, if I can get this going, this was a subdivision that's going in Kauai. And that area is going to be a nice little retention pond, nice little amenity, saying we're going to have a fountain probably and everything else for water when the people move in. Why don't we use that as a set pond? Why can't we use it as a set pond? Because designers, you got water's going to be coming into it someplace, and you have the ability to control it and leaving. Think about it. That's what can be done, because if you have a sediment pond as part of your treatment, you don't need to have inlet protection anymore. It's going into something that's far, far more effective, far more effective. Erosion control. We don't want to do erosion control. And boy, that is crazy, because it's one of the things that can save contractors lots of money. Stage of removal of vegetation. You know, do your controlled diversions. Put on something that's called soil binders. Ask those vendors about, do you have soil binders? What it is, it's a glue that's on a temporary basis. Very effective, very effective. Think about establishing vegetation while the project's going, not at the end of the project. Reviewers, make sure that that is what's on the designer's plan. Inspectors, take a look at it and see, are they doing erosion control? It will save every contractor in here money to do erosion control in the long term. You just got to do it. They have different products out there, rolled erosion control products. ECB's erosion control blankets on hillsides. You have them turf reinforcement mats. All of these are available for you to use. Designers, if you put it into the plan. Designers. You hear me say that all the time. Reviewers, take a look at those plans. Contractors, you know as well as I do when these don't work. Let the designer know that they don't work, so you can get something better. But the biggest one, the best BMP that I can think of is communication. Communication, contractors, inspectors, you're out there every day. You see what works, what doesn't work. You've seen when stuff is sitting there and nobody's paying attention to it. Designers and reviewers, do you go out and take a look at what you design? How many contractors out here have seen a designer coming by and taking a look at his inspection, your inspection form? They got to go out, because if designers, if you don't go out, and reviewers, if you don't go out and see what's on a construction site, you have not a clue about sediment erosion control. Contractors can help you tremendously here. So communicate verbally. Don't have to be texting all the time, but communication is the cheapest and least expensive and most effective BMP in our litany of BMPs to use. All right, of all the BMPs that we have on a construction, think about them, folks. What's the one that you can be almost guaranteed to see on every stormwater pollution prevention plan? If you were to say inlet, storm drain, inlet protection, you'd be absolutely correct. The only trouble with stormwater inlet protection, they only work when it doesn't rain. And you're going to see why as we're talking here. The administrative rules, 1155, says basically, permittee, you have to put stuff in all the time, unless there happen to be a set pond. So in other words, if you have a sediment pond, all your water discharges in there, you don't need inlet protections. So I could save you a lot of time, a lot of money. But what it says right there is basically, you got to put something in that interrupts the discharges that are coming down the street before the waters enter an inlet. Key word, before. That's the key word on here that we got to take a look at. And excuse me, if you don't have any type of set pond between, this says basically permittee, whoever pulled the permit, you got to put something in front of the inlets. The trouble is, that's where the problem is. In other words, we're the problem, not the product is the problem. There's different types of inlet protection. Out in Colorado, we have a lot of rock. We can use it. It's commonly used. Heavy, doesn't float. But let's take a look at this one. I bet if everybody looked hard at there, you would find this someplace. And again, I have never seen streets that clean on a construction site. Never. But these are wattles. The trouble with this one is that there's no way that that wattles is ever going to be effective. You have got to stake the wattles to the ground. And I want to see anybody in this room drive a wooden stake through a wattle into asphalt. It ain't going to happen. So you got to have alternatives. And you got to think about those alternatives. Sandbags, for example, work real good, put on top. But here's the biggest one. If you can lift that wattle up 5 feet, that's a lightweight wattle. That lightweight wattle is not the problem. It's the fact that you put the lightweight wattle in front of the inlet. That is going to be moved anytime it rains. Now, let me show you a little bit what happens in here. Since I get that. This is a testing that was done at Auburn University for Alabama Department of Transportation. And basically what it is, that's their specs. If you notice, they have the wooden stakes across to try to hold the wattles down. And they ran some things on here, and just take a good hard look, because this is what happens at every single one of your inlets if you use them wattles. Just take a look at it. Notice where the water's coming in. It's supposed to go over the top, folks. It's not even going anywhere close over to the top, is it? It's all underneath. Well, why did that happen? Well, take a look at that. See that thing going up and down? Those wattles float. If they float, they are a joke, to be very honest with you. Keep that one in your mind for a while. If they float, they are a joke. See how that water just flowed right underneath it? This is what happens on every single one of your inlet protections if you have wattles there. So that's sort of throughout everything that we use on our construction site, doesn't it? Because it's not the product is not the problem, by the way. The products are good. If they float, okay. Designers, did you alert the contractor that that is a product that's going to float? You have to make sure it doesn't float. The product is not the failure. It's the humans that are the failure. So keep that in mind. The products, I have rarely seen a product fail on a construction site. But boy, do I see a lot of places where I, as a designer, I as an inspector, see things that are failing all the time on here. There's alternatives, fiber mats that could be tied to the grates on your inlets there. Notice the sediment on the ground. It worked. And you have other ones on here. If you got sediment on the ground, that's exactly what we're looking for. But if you put in some type of barrier that blocks the inlet totally blocks it, what's going to happen is that you're going to eventually end up having water is going to be diverted. And if you compare the top photograph with the bottom photograph, look at the amount of sediment on the bottom one. Not there, is it? That's what happens when you put something across everything. Let me give you a better example. Let's go over to Kauai. And this was a picture that I had to be over there. We're just going to take a look at that particular inlet. And what is it? It's an inlet that indeed we put a fabric underneath. I saw it coming in from the airport yesterday. My only question to you, if this is so good, so terrific, and something you see every time on your construction sites, question is, where's the sediment? Where is the sediment? They should be having sediment on the outside and doesn't count on both sides of that grate. It should be all on top of it. Matter of fact, there's where your sediment is. It went into the storm drain system. So you're putting in something that doesn't work. And it doesn't work because the fabric clogs up. When it clogs up, you don't get anything to go through. And next thing you know, the water pressure will make that whole thing fail. So all of our sediment right into the storm drain system. Isn't that defeating the purpose of a storm drain protection inlet method? We're the problem. We're meaning designers, reviewers, inspectors, contractors. We're the problem. It's not the product. It's us that we have to correct on here. So think about these as we go through. You've always got to have something that's going to be a backup in case you need an overflow or whatever the case may be. For example, this is an overflow that we use as a Dandy product, and it in turn does a pretty good job, but that's the purpose of it, is for water to overflow. But how do inlet protection measures function? Got to ask ourselves that. This is not just a contractor's job. This is not just a designer's job. It's all of our jobs to think about that. We have two scenarios. Water falls to a sump, or water goes flowing on grade. If flowing to a sump, water's collected, and look what happens. It floods the street. Welcome to the world of sediment erosion control. You have got to have flooding to make these work. Every contractor, I know you hate that word. I can't blame you. But you had to ask yourself, you know, how does this barrier in front of an inlet, and why would anybody put a porta potty right above an inlet like that? But they did. But how do these work? The answer is they don't. They don't do the sediment removal. It's the fact they create flooding that does the sediment removal. So basically, if you as an inspector go out and you come across something that is no flooding, no sediment, that says that essentially that inlet protection failed. This is an example where the inlet protection is working. And it's also an illustration of where it's not working. Where the flooding occurs, it's working. That's exactly what you want to happen. But take a look up there in front of that tire. Clean as a whistle, isn't it? That says that it failed 100%. Lack of flooding is an indication that you have the lack of inlet protection. Kind of destroys everything that we've been thinking about that I've seen throughout the United States, where contractors say, let's put that in front of an inlet. Well, why did we put it in front of an inlet? Because the designer gave us a plan that shows that there's got to be inlet protection. We're not doing the job. The conclusions about sump inlet protections, their effectiveness is extremely, extremely small. Very small. Most of the sediment laden waters will go into your inlet. So inlet protection, don't count on it being very effective. And don't count it as being your only best management practice on a construction site. That is where you have flaws in there. But that's nothing compared to what happens when we have something installed on grade inlets. Here we are. This is one of our construction sites that we were at, that we happen to have things put in there. And we have the fact that water comes down the gutter, captures some debris. But where's the sediment? Do you see any of it? But there is. Right there. That's all the sediment that they capture. They're on a grade, they divert water. They are just about 100%. I'll go down and say 99.9% ineffective, because they're just diverting the water down to the sun. That's why all your flooding occurs, is that we block the inlets on the streets that have a grade. We can't get rid of the water. So basically, we got a problem here, which is basically saying, you know, the inlets and in front of, the barriers in front of inlets on a grade, all we're doing is diverting water, and we're causing the major flooding. Think about this. So we have to go back and look differently on it. So, but on grade inlet protections, you might as well just throw it away. You're not doing that much good. And they're the main reason why flooding does occur at the lower end and the sump inlets. And, you know, they in turn are things that we've got to do better. They don't remove sediment for us. We're just doing tokenisms. Again, keep the word. If it floats, it's a joke. That's the things that I want you to keep in mind. There's inlet protection for area drains. If you ever, contractors, see this on a drawings, or if you ever, contractors, do this, do not allow me to come out and do an inspection on your site. I will rip a good one for you on that. They do not work with concentrated flows coming to it. And I heard it rains occasionally in Hawaii. And that's something got to go there. But they got alternatives. Think about alternatives, everybody. You can build up stuff. You can do much better protection wherever we're at. They are a very effective method if you design it correctly. And if you take the time, contractors, to do it right. And ironically, it's going to save you money. It's going to save you a lot of money with some of the things that are going out there these days. It can be as simple as rock barriers around an area drain. Or you can buy some products that are on the market. This is called Silt Saver out in Georgia. Georgia has a lot of red clay. They work beautifully. But you got to find the product. You got to use it right. And our traditional way of doing things means that we're not always doing it right. There's alternatives, though, for inlet protection measures. This is what I dubbed as going to be a curb and gutter barrier. Just something right in the middle of the curb with water coming down. And notice how nasty that brown looking water is. Came back the next day. This is what I saw. That looks like a lot of sediment that's in that water, isn't it? How are we doing on my time? The thing that's important here to note is upstream of those sandbags or gravel bags, there's a lot of sediment, far more than what you're going to collect with just an inlet protection by itself. Notice where the clean water is or the clean pavement is. It's still allowed water to go into the inlet. Thus, we reduce the amount of flooding in the streets. We let the inlet serve like it's supposed to be. And in the long term, it can serve as capturing sediment from behind the sidewalk itself. They're very effective. You got to think differently. But basically, if you have something that looks like this, just your maintenance now is going to increase because you're going to get more sediment, but you're satisfying the health department's requirements. You're satisfying EPA requirements. Of course, we do have the caveat with all of our rules and regulations that says, hey, if it rains, it's going to flood or cause erosion, we can remove it. And guess what? This is what happens. I know it happens. You know it happens. I've seen it throughout the United States. And all of a sudden, all the barriers are on the sidewalk 2 months after the storm came by. Man, don't let EPA come out here and see those sites, because that's something that can really cause problems. But who makes a decision to remove the inlet protection? Not me. Who makes that decision? That's something you got to think about, because there's no definition in the rules and regs of what a flood condition is. Nothing. So somebody's going to be pulling them out there, and EPA never had intent for somebody to say, pull them out and just leave them stuff on top of the sidewalk, because I know it happens. You know it happens. And all you're doing is just simply saying, let's let it go to the biggest sedimentation pond in Hawaii. It's called the Pacific Ocean. And that is something that's not acceptable. So that brings in other alternatives. Inlet inserts. Why not use them? There's a variety of them. This is just 4 simple examples of inlet protection that goes in there into the inlet itself. And basically what I like about them, you put them in there, put the grate on top, and water flows into the product itself. Well, if water flows into the product, sediment flows into the product. And you got to be careful there, though. You're now doing something that does minimize flooding, but you also have to be careful that, hey, have we done the proper work to get all of our protection measures that are filled up with sediment and taken care of? These are just 2 examples that I had on here. That's all. But now you've got something that's alleviating flooding and still capturing sediment. And you don't have to have a change order. How about that? So all of this stuff that we're talking about into here is that if we have these installed with an inlet insert, hey, we don't have to have the flooding. You can save yourself a lot of costs. And a lot of that cost is going to end up being the fact you don't have to go back and reinstall everything. But there's the caveat is the biggest problem. Notice what it says. Something that removes sediment prior to the water discharging in there. If you're using inlets, and I encourage you that you do, ask yourself, does the Hawaii Department of Health approve these mitigation measures? Because that means water's going into the inlet, which is something there that indeed they're trying to avoid. There's sediment traps, basins and traps, because if you take a look at it up there and highlighted, it says that if we can use them, and if you're using them, you don't need the inlet protection. You let everything go into a pond. But designers, you have to be careful of what you're selecting here, because you got to make sure that this thing's going to function, not only to collect water, but also how to get it to the pond. You also got to think about the fact that, excuse me, the runoff waters is going to drain into the pond that you, as a reviewer, don't need to say you got to put a barrier in front of the inlets. Don't need that anymore, because everything's treated by the pond. It's not entirely true, but pretty close to it. The other one that comes in there, designers, where that water comes in there, See where those pipes are and the circle around in there? Look what happens when that pond fills up to the overflow. All those pipes get buried. So you've got a design feature that is so critical to make sure this has got to be functional, not only for sediment control, but also for no flooding control. So there's a lot of goodies in there. Erosion control, contractors, if you don't do erosion control, you're missing out and you're increasing the monies tremendously. And if there's a change order, it always gets approved. I guess you're going to continue that way. But erosion control saves you money. Doesn't cost you money. Use them. And then there's this communication. This communication is so important that if you have any of these things, reviewers and designers, you're key elements on this. Notice those arrows flow both ways. Reviewers, you got to talk to designers. Designers, you got to talk to reviewers. But remember, who's the client? The client is not the reviewer or the regulatory agency. It's the contractor. So reviewers, keep in mind that, hey, we got to make this so the contractor can make use of it, not what we think should be done. Contractors, the best buddy you have on a construction site is the inspector. They are going to save your cookies. Because if they in turn see something that's not going to work, you don't have to worry about paying fines that could be up to $35,000 or $37,500 per day per violation that EPA could impose on you. Huge. And inspectors, talk to the reviewers. Inspectors, not only do talk to designers. Designers and reviewers, get out and see what the site looks like. Don't sit in your office and be happy. Contractors, work with regulatory agencies. Let the regulatory agencies know that if you put something in front of an inlet, it probably will not work. And with that in mind, I'll leave you with the parting words I have on here. If it floats, it's a joke. If you keep that in mind, you're going to be able to do fine. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Jerry. So now we're going to open up to the question and answer portion. If you have a question here, please raise your hand and we will bring a microphone to you so you can be recorded for all our virtual listeners. And all our virtual listeners, if you have a chance to type a question into your question and answer feature, we will hopefully get to you if we have enough time. Question over here.
Oh, okay.
Turn around.
Hi, I had a question. So you had that photo with the geotextile fabric within that drop inlet. And I'm wondering if there's anything that the contractor can do to modify it in order to use the geotextile fabric, or if you'd think that perhaps that's just not an effective method.
Well, I'd like to respond by what we saw where that picture, where some of those pictures were taken in Florida. The best BMP that the contractor had was a piece of rebar. Went there and punched holes in it. It doesn't work is what I'm saying basically to you. Try something else. They do make an inlet insert that goes right inside there. You can capture. That's what I would prefer because the water can go in and the sediment can be captured. Of course, the ultimate is go to a pond if you can do that one too. That help? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
thank you.
You're welcome. Easy crowd.
Yeah. Oh, one back here. Claudia.
Actually, it's not a question. Jerry showed you a picture where the witches' hats with the water flowing into it. Those pictures are from here in Hawaii on Middle Street. So they do work.
Thank you, Claudia. And there are other products out there. So take a look at all the products in there. I think you'll find that they're very effective. The big one is do check with Matt, with the health department for Bobby. And I'm pretty sure they're going to say it's okay. But by what the rules and regs say directly, it's supposed to intercept before water enters the inlet. That's a ridiculous statement to make, in my opinion. That comes from EPA, by the way. That doesn't come from Hawaii. Did I see something happen over there?
Okay, I think that'll wrap up the inside. Might have a time for one more question online if there's one.
There's two questions about wattles actually. So should sandbags have been used to weight down the wattles? And what measures other than wattles are you aware of that can be installed in paved swales?
Okay. The sandbags is the one thing that you should be probably weigh down the wattles if you're on the concrete there. And actually it could be done on a area that's ground as far as that goes. The only problem that you got is that every once in a while, somebody likes to remove those weights every once in a while, so that'd be a maintenance issue. Can you ask the second question again, please?
Yes, what measures other than wattles are you aware of that can be installed in paved swales?
In the soils, is that what they said?
Swales.
Oh, swales, okay. Wattles can be installed in swales, but you have to really stake those suckers down. And the biggest problem that I see with wattles and swales is that contractors, they don't want to buy the most expensive product. You guys probably want to make sure you buy the least expensive. And that's probably about a 6-inch high wattle. Don't do it. It's not worth your time, not worth your money, because you're supposed to bury about 2 to 3 inches of the wattle into the ground. That means basically you got 4-inch height of a barrier in front of the swales. So get away from those shallow barriers. As far as other alternatives, rock works very well if it's used done correctly. But if you're going to be using rocks, don't just put it in so that the rock looks like this. It's got to have a dip in it so that water can go over the top of it. And also you want to have in here at least 12 to 15 inches of height at that low point. So rock would be your alternative in there.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Let's give him another round of applause for Dr. Jerry Fifield, everyone. All right, that'll conclude our session here. Thank you for attending. The next session begins at 9:15 a.m. Don't forget to stop by and check out our vendors during the break. And also, as a side note, if you guys do have any additional questions, the speakers will be available on the break. Feel free to go up and talk. We all know he loves to talk. So thank you very much.